Hi, everyone. Today we are going to look at the role of subjectivity in photography across three major time periods: modernism, postmodernism, and contemporary art. We'll trace how photography has shifted from personal expression to critique and identity politics and into today's networked and hybrid practices. It's going to serve as just kind of getting our toes wet into these different concepts. And then as we move forward throughout the semester, we will be expanding more on photography theory and the photographers that are presented in this lecture today. Defining subjectivity. Subjectivity in photography is about the photographer's perspective and personal vision. Unlike objectivity, like we were talking about last week, which claims neutrality, subjectivity embraces emotion, psychology, and cultural positions. So this photograph right here is by Laszlo Moholy-Nagy, who we looked at with our objectivity lecture, and we were talking about how his abstract work with photograms was all about reducing objects down to their most basic formal elements. Therefore, talking about an exact representation of reality because we are just presenting the object as is. This work by Laszlo Moholy-Nagy is talking about reality in a different way because instead of having the objective aesthetic where we are taking frontal photographs of no artistic vision, here with the Berlin Radio Tower, we are seeing an entirely new perspective as to how we experience the radio tower, because we are looking down at a very extreme bird's eye angle. So, if we were to compare his photograph on the right to a more objective approach to radio towers on the left, they are both representing reality, but in different ways. With the subjective photograph of Laszlo Moholy-Nagy, we are getting an insight as to his experience on top of the radio tower versus the one on the left, where it is objective, just showing how radio towers are as we were to experience them on the ground, our everyday reality. So, with objective and subjective photographs, while one is taking away the narrative and the photographer's personal expression versus subjective, where we are getting the photographer inserting their experience, they are both representing reality in different ways. Modernist subjectivity, we have photographers who believed that photography could express something deeper than reality. We have a personal or psychological truth associated with this. This aligned with modernist ideas in painting, literature, and psychoanalysts. So we are more about emotions here with modernist subjectivity and exploring the unconsciousness. And so this is where we start getting into more surrealist photographs where they seem a little bit more dreamy and slightly unusual. So when we move on to the different movements in schools associated with modernism. Like I said, surrealism with dreams. Um, we started off with pictorialism and its soft focus to the surrealism where photographers experimented with ways of using the medium for personal expression. So, with surrealism, to represent that unconsciousness, like we have here with Dora Maar, we are combining different imagery together to get that surrealist idea. And then we also have Expressionism in Germany that influenced this photographic style, where here it is emphasizing mood over accuracy. So, just some key figures, um, both photographers and writers and theorists, because when it comes to talking about what makes a movement, it isn't just photographers. We are talking about all different art mediums. We are talking about what is happening politically, socially within our culture, and what sort of writings are coinciding with those different concepts. So, thinking about Alfred Stieglitz's cloud studies or equivalents, um, those are meant to express emotions. We have Man Ray's rayographs. Those are similar to Laszlo Moholy-Nagy's photograms, where it is captured chance and unconscious form. And then one of the major writers, Walter Benjamin, who examined how photography has transformed our perception of reality today. So, here with postmodern subjectivity, we are talking about how photography isn't just personal, it's shaped by culture, gender, race, and power struggles. And they questioned whether photography could ever be neutral. And so here with Nan Golden's Heart-Shaped Bruise, this is coming from their book, The Ballad of Sexual Dependency, where they are talking about the LGBTQ community, the relationships and different challenges that come with being that, either personally or politically. And so with these images, they are very raw in the fact that we can see either love happening or we can see traces of physical abuse as we do here. But what is interesting about Nan Goldin's work is even though they look raw, they were constructed. And so, constructed meaning that it wasn't just a candid shot, they were formally put together. So, that kind of goes along with the idea of how could this photograph be neutral when there is a collaboration happening between the photographer and the subject. And so, actually, throughout time, as people have investigated these photographs, they are wondering how authentic they are because it is a constructed image. But still, that can raise a question of, well, constructed images could still represent reality. It's just becoming a lot more narrative here and bigger on storytelling because of that collaboration and being able to slow down and consciously think about how to portray this certain concept. And so now, when we think about postmodernism, the movements in schools associated with it, um, postmodernism used photography to critique dominant ideologies, conceptual artists challenged authorship. So, and then feminist photographers addressed the gaze, and identity-based work foregrounded lived experiences. So these are all very, very big, hot topics that we are going to dive more deeply into chapter 2 of our book, Criticizing Photographs by Terry Barrett, because these are all like fat, juicy, really conceptual topics that can kind of be a little bit overwhelming when we first approach it, especially talking about the idea of the gaze, whether it be female gaze versus the male gaze, and then also talking about different political art that is happening that is very vulnerable and very intense. So, some key figures here as far as photographers and writers and theorists. We already talked about Nan Golden, but another big key figure here is Cindy Sherman and her self-portraits of deconstructed female stereotypes within her Untitled film series. And then all of these writers are very, very big in postmodernism, but the two that you would see as you are beginning your photography theory journey would be Roland Barthes and Susan Sontag, who reframed photography as a medium of culture and ideology. So then now we are getting into contemporary subjectivity. Contemporary photography explores subjectivity in a global, networked, and intersectional context. Artists combine personal stories with social critique, often using digital tools and social platforms. This work right here is by Latoya Ruby Frazier. She actually is the department head for photography at the School of the Art Institute in Chicago. And this photograph is coming from her The Notion of Family series. And she actually won a Guggenheim Fellowship for this. And her work was about Braddock, Pennsylvania, where she is from, and how that is a steel mill town and the environmental impact that those factories had and, and within Braddock. And so what her series is illustrating is one, the family dynamics between her mother, her grandmother, and other relatives, and then also showing photographs of the actual town and how it is becoming decrepit. And with this, we also start seeing here an sort of inception, I guess, of identity, a progression of family. We see a young Latoya Ruby Frazier in the front, and then in the mirror, we see her mother in there, and they are both standing side by side here. And so we have this element of time. And then when we see this photograph in the context of all of her other work, showing how these environmental challenges are impacting her mother, and how Latoya is kind of dealing with health, not only with her mother, but also with herself. So now we have the contemporary movements and approaches. So talking about today, Subjectivity is shaped by digital culture, diaspora, and as I said, identity politics. Artists are using photography to document and perform identity while also integrating social and political structures. So here we kind of have a lot of work where it can very much be a lot about activism, but then also thinking about personal diary and documentation, narratives. So here we have the beginning of a three-piece progression of a body of work by Sophie Calle. And part of a larger portfolio called Because, and this is the series of David. And so Sophie Calle is a French writer and photographer, and she deals a lot with memory. So we're going to briefly go through this progression on what is happening within this work because it goes beyond text. And that's another thing that is happening within contemporary photography is it is integrating other mediums. It's not just about the photograph sitting on a paper. We are getting more into creating a visual experience for our viewers. So here is a quick summary about what Because is about. So it is part of, as I said, Cal's ongoing exploration between the relationship of narrative, memory, and photography. And she is mixing humor and melancholy with her particular eye for irony. In each of these pieces, there is a felt curtain embroidered with Cal's personal writing, and it is concealing a hidden photograph behind it. In presenting viewers with the text before the picture, Cal appends the usual order in which images are read. So here the text is saying, David is dead because I have no words to describe his world. Here we start unveiling the photograph. And now we have revealed the image. So here we have some contemporary key figures. In the other presentation, the one that just briefly explained the movements of or time periods of modernism, postmodernism, and contemporary art, we saw a piece by Zanel Muhali, who calls their portraits about visual activism, so confronting the LGBTQ plus community and the discrimination that can happen within it. We also have this other photographer who we will dive in more once we start exploring how to work with color, Wolfgang Tillmans, who is combining the diaristic and political within his work. And then we also have theorists like Judith Butler and Bell Hooks, who explore subjectivity as performance and resistance. In summary, the subjectivity aesthetic in photography has evolved from personal expression to postmodern critique to today's global, digital, and intersectional practices. Each stage is reflecting broader cultural and philosophical shifts.